Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ruth Petran, and I lead Food Safety and Public Health at Ecolab. We really appreciate your being with us today. It's been such an incredible and challenging year, and we really thank you for hanging with us through it all. This is our final webinar of 2020, focused on leveraging technology. As you may recall, we've presented on a series of topics this year under the banner of Food Safety 101. Starting in March, we talked about the essentials. Then in June, we moved to a focus more specifically on wash programs. In September, we talked about health inspections, what to expect, what's found, and how to use the findings to help improve. And here we are today to tie everything all back together, thinking about digital. If you missed any of these, you can access the content on demand on the ecolab.com website, and I encourage you to do so. Today we're switching things up a bit to make this more interactive with a panel discussion that I'm honored to moderate. Joining us today are Daryl Weiser, who's Food Safety Program Manager, Scott Dixon, Director of Food Safety Platforms, and Gerard Duplessis, who is the Global Head of Marketing at Lobster Inc. The plan is for us to do a bit of discussing among all of us, but we are really interested in hearing from all of you as well. So please be ready to send us questions using the Q&A panel so you can be involved in the conversation as well. Our agenda is shown on this slide. We'll start off by just thinking about food safety issues. They are real and significant, and I think sets the backdrop really well for what we'll talk about. The reality is that because of this, we need better ways to help manage these issues. And we'll talk about how digital approaches can really help. And then, as stated, we will certainly have time for Q&A at the end. So just to set the backdrop from a foodborne illness perspective, these data are summarized periodically, and the real key from this slide is what's in the green box. Each year, the World Health Organization estimates that 600 million people get sick because of foodborne illness, and perhaps as many as 420,000 of them die. In the U.S., it translates to about 1 in 6 of us getting sick. The numbers are fairly consistent around the world in developing economies at that kind of rate. But regardless, there's a tremendous burden of illness here. The next slide presents some additional facts related to health inspections and so-called health department intelligence insights that Ecolab has collected. When we look at the top findings that are recorded in these routine inspections conducted in 2020, year to date, we see that the top 3 really do relate to cleanliness. The first one being overall maintenance and cleanliness of physical facilities, and then non-food contact surfaces and food contact surfaces, contributing to more than 20% of all recorded violations. And then you could see the others with hand washing playing a role as well in being commonly reported among these top 5 violations. The next slide relates all of this back to the food safety challenges. If we recall from the previous data about health department inspection violations, the top 3 were all cleanliness related. The data here on this slide, which represents contributing factors to foodborne illness from the US CDC, indicates that about 13% of the time, contaminated equipment or the environment contributed to foodborne illness. So I look at this and I see opportunities, and wouldn't it be great if we were aware of where the issues were before they led to an illness outbreak? So to kick this off, I have a question for my colleague Daryl. Can you tell us, Daryl, how food safety professionals might use technology to help address some of these very big and very real food safety challenges?
Yeah, thank you. great setup. We've looked at this data, and I've been in the food safety industry for about 20 years now, right? And I've really seen a change in the use of technology. When I started, it was all paper, right? We can remember back to paper health inspections, paper logs, which are still being used in a lot of places, right? And sitting down with a spreadsheet and trying to, transfer numbers around to track some of these numbers. So I think we've really seen a change, right? We've seen inspections start to be digitized. We've seen more dashboards, more trending. A lot of the data you have here is from, great dashboards people have developed, right? We've seen our third-party inspections that some of our companies do really look to more digital and seeing things digital in dashboards. But as we can see from these numbers, a lot of that hasn't translated to really changing behaviors at the facility level. And I've seen that throughout my career, and I think a lot of you probably have too. So how can we really get this information, right, to help us change behaviors at the facility level? And I think that's really where our blind spot is. Right? I've spent a lot of my career trying to implement technology and move technology forward, especially as we all have limited resources, right, which this year has shown. The model of being in the facilities, trying to train in person, right, and having the manpower to do that just really isn't applicable, especially this year and in today's world as we're all asked to do more with less. So I think that's really where we have to challenge ourselves and push technology forward. And so that's why I'm excited to be part of this panel and to be part of what Ecolab's doing. At Ecolab, we've really been pushing, innovating in this technology space, right? And looking how can we improve our technology at the facility level and close that blind spot and really improve and change behaviors. And I'm going to turn it over to Scott because he's really been a champion for us in looking at some mobile technologies and how those technologies can improve and change behaviors and increase efficiencies at the facility level.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. So as a company, we've spent a lot of time talking to our customers about what their biggest challenges are. And often we hear that there is a significant challenge, obviously, labor, and this year really has been no different. So with increased labor costs, high turnover, ongoing training issues, really coupled with changing markets where we know customers are looking for more fresh options, they're looking for delivery, for on-site production. The need for visibility at the facility level is really important to ensure procedure compliance, food safety standards, and quality really are at an all-time high. So that's why we have partnered with several technology industry leaders and customers to develop what we call our Ecolab Digital Food Safety application. So in the retail space, it's branded MarketGuard 365, and in the quick service space, it is branded K4Tech. So if you see either of those names, you'll know that's what we're talking about here. So we've created a tool that allows the facility to digitally record their daily tasks, and then we provide all of that data rolled up in a reporting solution online that provides really multiple levels of value, either from the facility level, at a single unit level, all the way through food safety and quality assurance teams. And we're finally able to provide some visibility to the compliance of those SOPs and the ongoing completion. So I'm sure have all seen in restaurants or in retail locations, binders and binders or boxes full of printed logs that were probably hastily completed, to say the least. So now customers really have the ability to complete those checklists digitally on really any standard procedure in the facility. So they could range anywhere from temperature checks to, which we use an automated Bluetooth thermometer for, quality checks, cleaning and sanitation checks. But it's really important, I think, to remember when we move from paper to digital, we don't want to just digitize the existing checklist. Part of the value of the tool is making sure we are working together to kind of remap and optimize those checks to make sure we're taking advantage of a digital tool and the ways we can capture those temperatures, as well as making sure we're just moving through those checks efficiently as possible. So with the data that we collect from that tool, combined with food safety data from other sources, from regulatory inspections and other areas, we're really starting to utilize trending and predictive analytics, and we're starting to really see the value and the insights that we can provide from that data to the facility level and across the company on a daily basis. So I mentioned creating value from the tool, and one of the ways, or we actually do this in a number of ways, not only do we do it with working to streamline the processes, but we really put a focus on the correct and timely completion of the checks. So things like audible alerts, visual alerts, help remind the user when it's time to complete a check, so they don't have to remember on their own. The tool helps them remember when it's time to do that, and they're able to complete them really quickly and easily using digital tools that improve their accuracy. So we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes around the time savings that we see for moving to a digital system, but we really can't discount the time and effort and materials that are savings really for moving to a digital system. Things like eliminating paper clipboards, the labor for creating those and storing them. And really just on those hard costs alone, we estimate about $10 per store per month on those savings alone.
That's great, and thank you, Scott, for the overview. Daryl, given your experience with these kinds of programs, applied at customers and so on, how have you seen a mobile technology kind of platform really improve food safety behaviors down at those unit levels?
Yeah, and I think Scott summarized it really well here, but I want to tell a couple of kind of personal experiences with it. First, kind of an interesting story. Scott has a picture there, and he's talking about hastily completed logs, and right, we actually experienced paper logs in a box like this. We went with our CEO to show him a mobile to launch in one of the companies I was with, and we came hauling out of the back with all these greasy boxes filled with paper logs, right? And right in front of him, which was fabulous. We didn't plan it. The box broke, right? And we had paper logs pretty much everywhere. So that's what we're dealing with in food safety a lot of times at the facility level, right? These logs that are hastily completed, they're stored. It's tough to get back to that information, right? So that one of the things when you digitize those is just access to that information, right? It kind of takes away that blind spot at the facility level I was talking about. But as Scott has here on the screen, as we implemented this in one of the previous companies I was with, we saw something pretty interesting. We were going along thinking, through our third-party inspections that we were getting about 95% of all of our checks completed. When we moved to digitize this and, there were time limits to when they had to do this and we could see what was being done, we actually saw that only about 30 to 40% of the logs were being completed when we wanted them to at the right time, right? And so, the information and what was going on in the stores was completely different than the information we were getting back. So that's one of the ways a tool like this can help. You can really challenge the team to make sure that the things you want done, temperature checks, right, hot holding checks, cooking checks, those critical control points, that they're being done at the right time and not just hastily completed, right, to fill out a log at the end of the day or the next day. The other thing Scott mentioned that was really good is we didn't just take it and digitize our current logs, right? We spent time going through a process evaluation to really look at what was important. And with the confidence we had in the increased data, we were able to really decrease the number of checks and logs that our associates were completing because we had confidence they were doing it. We had confidence in the data. Right? We could see the data almost in real time coming through, which really allowed us to free up our associates for other tasks and allow them to do more and to concentrate more on food safety than completing these logs, which again leads to a huge time saving and just overall value. It's great to be able to present to operators, as we all do whenever we're trying to implement something like this. We're trying to get more resources, right? It always comes down to cost and efficiency. And so I think that was a great model to be able to show that we can really use that time that's been spent really on paper by improving our food safety processes, right? Cutting down on the time used and improving our efficiency, which save the operators money and time, while also giving us more confidence in food safety. So, I think this is kind of the first step, and we're going to continue to talk about other things, right, on this webinar that's going to, that can help us to also, improve behaviors past this. But I think the real improvement we saw is we had confidence that checks were being done, right? We had confidence that people were actually looking at the critical control points. We were getting data back on that, and we were saving time, freeing up associates, to do other things, whether it was spending more time in cleaning or just operational efficiencies. So, and I think, Scott, you're going to talk a little bit more about some of the time savings we've seen on tools like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the screen now, you'll see a couple of graphs where we've done some real-world time studies. So we found, on average, a 12-second savings per temp event. And we all know with the scarcity of labor and increased demands, time saving and accuracy are certainly important. So the reduction of time really comes from the connected Bluetooth thermometer. So you take a temperature of the food, it automatically sends that temperature to the application. Quick on-screen navigation and then automated corrective actions really allow the user to quickly record those temperatures and complete those checks with things even like auto-stabilizing thermometers so that you're getting an accurate temperature. It really helps improve the accuracy and the speed in which we can complete those checks. So if the temperature is out of compliance, the tool would automatically notify them of that issue and then prompt them with a number of corrective actions that they could take to correct the issue.
Thanks, Scott. Those results are remarkable. You mentioned corrective actions. Can you talk about how just attention to corrective actions can really improve food safety?
Yeah, absolutely. If we could go to the next slide, you'll see corrective actions really are an integral part of what we think any digital food safety solution should be. So if you have a user that enters a temperature that's out of spec or answers a question in a negative fashion, the application would prompt the user that there's an exception and then give them options for the proper procedure to correct the issue. So if it were a temperature that were just, let's say, a degree or two out of spec, the application may instruct them to continue cooking and then retemp. If it were a cold holding temperature that were significantly out of spec, perhaps the application would instruct the user to pull and discard that product that could pose a food safety risk. So with those corrective actions, the user has the ability to really review the corrective action, the things that they need to do. And with that, we also have included the attachment of directed training. So helps the user understand the exception and the ways that they can correct it. And we're working on a really exciting integration now with our counterparts at Lobster Inc. that will provide really easy access to Lobster's incredible user-focused and targeted training.
Thanks for that, Scott. And Gerard, let's bring you into this because this idea of identifying violations through some kind of audit, whether even in the old days and old paper ways, isn't really new. And then the idea of correcting those opportunities through training, again, is something that we would tend to think about. But can you tell us, how Lobster or more generally technology that now is in place can really, or what that can give to our customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you very much, Ruth, and good afternoon, everybody. Absolute pleasure to be talking with such a great panel here this afternoon. Exactly as you say, the idea here is not necessarily a new idea. However, technology really allows us to take it to the next level. And what I mean by that is support and extend the live in-person efforts that we're doing today. I'm not going to try and suggest today that digital training should replace in-person efforts entirely. That's certainly not the case. There's very important things like mimicry, for instance, cleaning as you go, or cleaning as you cook, in the kitchens it's called, or just driving a culture of learning that's really has to be done in person. But what technology can give us today is this incredible ability to scale and reach, frontline associates across an organization. Firstly, just reach them. So scale, number one. And then number two, reach them at speed or just at a higher velocity than we are able to implement and roll out in person. And those two elements combined really lead to cost savings and incredible cost efficiencies if compared to live training efforts. And I'll unpack that a little later, particularly the cost efficiency part a little later in the presentation. But those are probably the three core elements. Technology enables us to scale. It enables us to just reach every employee in a quick, and then in doing so, make the process more cost effective. More generally speaking, the model that you're seeing on the slide in front of you at the moment is really the model we're describing, right? So we're speaking specifically within the context of, for instance, a food safety violation or an opportunity for improvement. But really the broader digital training offering, what we're busy building out today, is an ability to act on any operational data point, actionable data point that gets surfaced. So as Scott just described, the incredible visibility that we now have through the processes that we roll out, what the piece we're busy building is the capability to assign digital training based on those opportunities for improvement in almost real time, which is really exciting for us.
That's powerful. Thank you. Daryl, thinking about the application of this, so what would be the advantage of being able to take this immediate action or make a correction in real time?
Yeah, great question, Ruth and Gerard, thanks for talking through that. So, I think about the time I spent, in food safety in a couple different companies, and we had this kind of tied corrective actions here into what Gerard's talking about, the corrective action process, right? We would see exceptions, whether it was from health department or from some third-party audits. We would get those. We would send out an email, right, that may reach the manager. It may not reach a manager or a lead. That person, may have been trained a couple years ago, may already have bad habits in place. That person would try to go out and do the corrective action, right, and train the associates or the employees. They may get to the right employee, not the right employee, right? So it's just, and a lot of that process is still going on today. And I think that's still a good process, right? I mean, we still need to close the loop on some of these things, but we're not really doing anything that affects real behavior right down at that level. And that's what Gerard's talked about so powerful. Think about, when you have an exception, that you can deliver the right training to the right person at exactly the right time, almost in real time, right? So that exception happens. You're able to identify the person, right? Exactly what the exception was, not some generalized training, right? And deliver it right to that person at that time. And so I think it's very powerful, right? That we can get that and actually to try, to change behaviors. Think about I at one point spent about 18 months developing an onboard for one of our companies, and it was great. We thought it was a great training, right? But it was delivered when they onboarded, kind of at one time, right? And the rest was kind of done through word of mouth. And as we all know, a lot of times through word of mouth of this in-person training, again, not to discount it, but a lot of times the habits or the bad habits that employees develop kind of creep into that training as we move further and further away from their onboarding. So this is a really powerful tool, really taking that specific exception, right, and delivering a very specific training to that exception and not a broad general training. And I think, Gerard, you're going to talk a little bit more about how technologically we're doing this, right, so that we get that specific training instead of that generalized training.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daryl. The model that you see in front of you and what I just described could seem quite, blue sky and some relief. So let's make it a little bit more practical. And I'm going to pick up on a specific phrase that you use there, getting the right training to the right person at the right time, right? So if we turn over to the next slide, what you're seeing in front of you there is table, I know, but this is actually the back end of the system recognizing a specific food safety violation or opportunity for improvement on the left-hand side, and then mapping it to a particular video lesson so training lesson online on the right-hand side. And we're taking this one step further to actually timestamp specifically where in that video lesson the particular learning outcome an individual would need to, fill that knowledge gap and ensure that they have the know-how to actually act in the right way the next time, and obviously bring that front of mind at the same time. And so that this model that you're seeing, we have violations mapped to particular sections within training, is really what we're talking about at a very practical level. Of course, the one missing piece there is how do you get it to the right person at the right time, and a layer that is added to this then is what we call in the Lobster world smart assignments. So smart assignments allows the opportunity to assign particular pieces of content to job roles or really an attribute that you want to attribute to a particular learner group or audience set, and have the system act automatically on when a particular violation is surfaced in this geography or region, brand, job role, etc., whatever attribute you want to build your audiences by. The assignment of this training happens automatically, and that's a piece again where we really should rely on technology to automate all of that heavy lifting for us. So rather than doing this assignment manually, even though you were assigning digital training manually, or often at least, that piece can be automated as well. Again, just saving so much time, right? Saving an enormous amount of overhead that's related to actually implementing corrective actions, particularly when it comes to behavior, and addressing that human element. So what I guess we're describing is a different way of looking at food safety training today. The traditional, or really the status quo, is we know that food safety, as Darryl also just described, is a key focus during onboarding, and of course it should be. But what happens after that initial certification is really the question that we, sort of the hypothetical question that we asked ourselves in to address while we're designing our food safety program. How is this constantly reinforced and assessed? And as per the Journal of Food Science on the left-hand side over there, the theory behind most food safety training programs is that an increase in knowledge will result in improved behavior. But studies have very clearly shown that that's not necessarily the case. Just because I know I have better knowledge of food safety best practice or particular principles does not mean I act in a different way. And the learning theory on this is very clear. For those who don't know on the call, on the right-hand side you have the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And what the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve very clearly explains to us, particularly within the context of learning practical skills, is that unless you're applying the new information that you've learned within the first 7 days of acquiring it, you will lose up to 75% of that information. So the little dotted lines with the spikes that go up, they're really there to reference how important reinforcing is, just to bring that knowledge front of mind again, and to really combat this forgetting curve, because we're all human and our lives get busy, and what's not front of mind certainly does slip away. So when you look at this together, it starts to make sense that the way to address ongoing behavioral change is by constant reinforcement, rather than a moment in time a moment in time training to cover the whole lot. It's not saying that that's not important. That is most certainly important, of course. We have to include that training in onboarding. But the question really becomes, what happens 30 days later, 60 days later, 90 days later, and how are those key elements reinforced?
That's good information to keep in mind. So Gerard, seeing it on the screen here, that makes sense. But how would you propose to do this differently? I mean, to actually change that frontline behavior is really what we're after. What do you think?
Sure. So what we mean by this behavior-based approach can really be summarized into two key points. One is, there's several pieces that fall into it, but if there's two key takeaways. One is that, again, as the forgetting curve explained, we forget quite easily, and so constant reinforcement is really important. Assessment is critically important, and then correcting, taking corrective action based on those assessments. So just the simple process of actually assessing and addressing a corrective action, that is such an enormous part of learning, of the training itself, it's almost, you can't separate that from the theoretical knowledge that needs to be passed on. It's arguably more of the learning that actually happens in that assessment and application piece. If you think back of 70-20-10 principles and such, and the way we do this is by introducing small bursts of microlearning in an associate's everyday workflow, or at least every week workflow, rather than big chunks of time sporadically, small chunks of time dispersed very frequently. Also providing course resources, things like practical assessments that not only address the theory, do we know that, or evaluate if a knowledge transfer is taking place with theory assessment, practical assessments can test whether an associate can actually perform the tasks that they've learned, which is critically important. The next element is teaching the why behind the how, particularly when it comes to breaking into long-term memory. We are quite poor at remembering things that we don't understand why they are such or need to happen. If it's a process that is taught parrot fashion, typically that's not a good way to transfer that knowledge into long-term memory. However, if I understand why I'm doing this, that goes a lot further. And the best way to teach that why behind the how is really to make it relevant to an associate's context, right? And what I mean by context is their job role. So don't try and give me training on everything that I need to know around, that there is to know on food safety. Help me understand the things that I need to know to apply in my role. Also, take my level of experience into account. I might have been doing this like Daryl for 20 years. I don't know if there's anything I could teach you, to be honest, but it might be, I might be doing this for 20 years, or I might be straight out of college into my first job, or at school and into my first job. So take my level of experience into account. And then very importantly, every person has a preferred language of learning. And so using technology to drive down cost efficiency in translations is incredible. There's massive strides that have been taken in translations technology, which we're now leveraging, for instance, natural language processing in collaboration with speech synthesis, it's always a tongue tie, drives down the cost of translations significantly. So we're now actually able to deliver training in a language of choice or in a preferred language to an associate. So really, understanding the why behind the how and making that experience as personal as possible is a key way to changing that behavior. And what we have seen, although this approach is really new from a digital perspective, what we have seen in studies where this model has been replicated is that it can improve food safety compliance by up to 38%. Now, my guess is that when we're implementing this at scale, as we're getting into the process now, the goal is obviously to beat those numbers, but those are significant improvements when you extrapolate that across at scale.
Those are significant, yeah, and there has to be a cost efficiency, marker in there as well. Can you elaborate on that a little further and maybe mention a couple other benefits that might be points of value to customers?
Sure, thanks for asking. So, a key piece of research that we did to understand the cost efficiency or just a cost comparison between in-person training or digital training. We did a piece of research about this almost about 18 months ago now with UI Parthenon. Long story short, the results were that you could see a cost saving of up to 35% in scaling digital training as opposed to in-person training. And the core piece of that, the core driver to that saving is really saving on seat time. What we mean by seat time is the amount of time that an associate would spend training. I mean, as you know, those are expensive hours, right? And particularly once you scale that across thousands of employees, every hour that's spent training is an hour which is paid for, which gets incredibly expensive. So the question becomes, how do you not compromise on the efficacy of the training, but save time at the same time? And so that's sort of, that's a key driver to cost efficiency. I guess the other benefits that I touched on already is the ability to scale and reach every employee, whether that's every manager, supervisor, or all the way to the front line with on a mobile device. And the key element for me is this matter of making of delivering quite a personal experience in that the system or what I receive really understands my context, i.e. my job role, my language, particular violations that I'm facing in my site, et cetera, can make that experience quite personal, and then again apply that at scale. It's a personal experience, but in a big way. And then I think one of the key, if not the most important benefits is, as Scott mentioned previously, it's just the incredible visibility, the layer of insight and visibility that we now have on what has happened and what has not happened, who is ready and who's not ready, where the gaps lie, et cetera, et cetera. So because it's digital, what digital training, best-in-class digital training really enables you to do is understand precisely where the gaps are in the analytics and the dashboards that you're receiving, understanding if new hires have done their training, understanding if existing employees have completed specific training on specific violations. How long are they spending? Who are the leaders? Who are the laggers? How do the training results from one unit benchmark against the operational performance across the group, et cetera, et cetera. So that sort of visibility and analytics is a space that is evolving, and there's so much innovation in there right now, and excites us enormously because it enables us to sharpen the pencil in terms of surfacing those opportunities for improvement and actually acting on them, because we can ascertain, or we can know, we have evidence that suggests that this training would solve that problem, and also how to go about that. So I guess that describes some of the benefits.
Those are great. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, we've heard a lot from these great experts. The reality is there are a lot of food safety and public health risks that we face and will continue to face. And I think what we've shown through this conversation is that really leveraging digital can help in management. We've talked about how technology has been shown to really change behavior of employees at the location level in a way that these more traditional kinds of visits may not do, because we can provide more detailed data and make sure that the right training is delivered to the right person at the right time. We've also talked about how leveraging these tools that replace the traditional paper logs really can increase accuracy, the completion rate, and visibility, certainly outside of the particular, maybe quality or food safety department. We know that any data that's collected is really a valuable resource for insights and can lead into development of advanced analytics. And finally, we talked about how these digital tools are really an important aspect of helping to maintain that strong food safety culture within your organization. So now we have some time and invite you all to join in the conversation as well. There is a Q&A panel on the side of your screen, and please feel free to type questions in there, and my colleague Ashley will be sharing those questions with us as they come in. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ruth. So we had a few questions come in about the digital food safety early on, such as market guards. So some of the questions were around customization of these type of platforms, the devices that can be used, the operating systems, and how data can be stored.
Yeah. Scott, maybe you could just kind of recap some points about those ideas?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the tool is available on iOS and Android from the app stores, or we can work with the company's IT teams as well to help deploy to their devices. So it is available on both. The data is stored in the cloud directly in, again, one of our technology partners, Microsoft. So it is stored directly in the cloud. And the portal dashboards are available from the portal, customer portal on a computer or on your phone. I think that was the bulk of the questions, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, and customize. So you can also certainly customize. That's the beauty of the tool, and how we help drive the value from leveraging the tool is to be able to customize those checklists based on what your SOPs are.
Hey, Scott, can I chime in just real quick? I think in the customized space too, right, one of the beauties of a tool like this is you can customize all the way down to the store level, right? I mean, you can, if you have different challenges in different health departments and different locations, you can customize, checks or questions to stores, cities, counties, anywhere in your hierarchical structure. So I think that's a pretty powerful part of customizing too. Think about being able to target individual locations with specific questions or checks or follow-ups you want them to do.
Absolutely. Ashley, do we have other questions?
We do. So this is more of a general one, but what value do customers find from the data collected? And I know we did touch on this a little bit, but maybe we can touch on it a little bit more.
Yeah. Daryl, maybe from your boots on the ground kind of experiences, can you talk about some of this?
Yeah, I think we talked a bit about some of it, but there are some of the values. We did talk about the value of just understanding what's actually being completed, right? Rather than, I gave that example of, we thought about 90 to 95% of the checks were being done, and it was really about 40%, right? We were able, knowing that, to drive that completion percentage back up to what we believed was a true, 90% instead of what we thought was a 90%. And then, as I just talked about, we were able to get data on individual locations and individual departments and really start to pinpoint. If you think about the data you shared in the beginning, Ruth, it's health department data, which may happen once a year, maybe twice a year, right? Third-party inspections, which are great, right? But again, may happen monthly, quarterly, sometimes twice a year. This is data that you're collecting on a daily basis, right? And you can really start to drive changes at those individual store levels, location levels, restaurant levels, plant levels, right, based off of data that comes specifically from departments. One of the great things Scott's done with the tool is you can even break this down into department, right? So instead of just seeing a, general data for a location, you can break it down by specific, whether it's cook line, right, or if you're a retail establishment, a deli, or whatever. You can see the data there, and then you can come back and, what I just talked about, and are there specific actions that you want to push, to that individual department, location, level. And so the data becomes very powerful. And then that next step that Scott touched on briefly, and we won't get into deeply today, is how do you then start using that data, right? We've got lots of data now instead of, very sparse data, to start doing some predictive analytics, which are my challenging locations, departments, right, plants, whatever you want to look at. Right? And then tie it all back into Gerard's. I can now use that data to get the right training to the right location instead of more of this generalized training. So just huge value in having this really individualized data that's coming on a daily basis rather than, the data we talked about in the beginning, which is, much more sporadic in nature.
Great.
Okay. So we talked a lot today about operators and users, but how can this technology we talked about benefit health inspectors?
Daryl, do you have a... That's a good question.
That's a really good question. I think a couple things. One, I think just from a health inspection, it's the accuracy of the data. I did do some health inspections at one point too, so I'm going to give the whole background of my career here. But really, you're going in, right, and think about the chicken, the greasy box with all the logs in it, right? One of the things you do on health inspections is you're looking at this data. You're trying to look at logs. You're trying to look at critical control points, and a lot of times in a very disorganized fashion. So it really does help organize that data and look at it. And I think if I think back to my time doing health inspections, to see a place with a tool like this that's tracking data, right, that's providing corrective actions and doing the right training, I think really gives you that confidence. And, I think there's a way in there to maybe look at some of our risk assessments and incorporate whether facilities are using digital tools and driving improvements with digital technology that may factor into some of these risk assessments that we do on facilities and how often they're going to be inspected. So just some thoughts off the top of my head.
Great. So the pandemic has forced us to look at training differently. I think we all are aware of that. Is this a longer-term trend, do we think, or is it simply a way we're handling our current situation?
That's a really good question. Gerard, what do you think? Start us off here.
Yeah, I just heard training, so I'm just jumping in there. It's a question we are often asked, and many of the trend that we've seen in many of our customers has been an aggressive increase in activity on the platform throughout the first wave, and obviously having new customers join as the limitations of in-person training become more real, and we continue to need to create some distance between ourselves. And so what we saw in the beginning is what our reaction in the beginning was, okay, this makes sense right now, and we really scrambled to try and get appropriate training to customers online, in a digital fashion, et cetera, to meet this demand. And even ourselves at the time thought it was really a spike in time. But as the year continued, there's really been very little decline in the activity that we're seeing on the platform, and more this longer-term, more sustainable digital training solutions. So, if you ask me, I don't believe that this digital training is really just a symptom of the pandemic. I truly believe that it's going to, this move to digital, this has really been a catalyst moment that's kind of woken us up and said, look, it can be significant, it can be extremely effective, significantly more cost-effective at the same time, and therefore, why are we not considering this as a ongoing solution, particularly within the context of what we've spoken about today? Not all training is equal, of course, and in-person training is always going to be good for some things, but in responding to particular areas of improvement at scale, I really think it's been a catalyst moment. The description I used the other day was, feel that cat's out the bag, and we're not going to put it back in.
Definitely.
Great. Is this type of technology or software, and I think it's talking about either being used in the healthcare environment. I'm not sure if they were talking about within a food service healthcare or healthcare in general, but I thought we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Scott, do you have a perspective on that, or Daryl?
Yeah, so to my knowledge today, we don't have the application in the healthcare environment, although it certainly would lend itself to be used there. No reason that we couldn't leverage the same tools, same checks, temperature recordings, things that are required, cleanliness checks. Certainly no reason we couldn't leverage the tool there as well.
And if I may jump in there, Ruth, from a training perspective, again, we're describing the same model, and in a very similar way, you can respond in the same way. So that's the beauty of digital, right? We can connect many things, and have events trigger a sequence of actions. And so, in any environment really where we have this control, this necessity for a very controlled state, controlled process, and we can identify violations from that process, we can then act by assigning training.
Terrific. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. I'm just going to kind of combine two questions here. I think they're related. So the first is, do we have do we have to use a Bluetooth thermometer to populate the temperature log? And at the end of the day, can we print out an actual log for the location from this platform? But a related question was, what are some key successes from moving from a paper-based tool to a digital tool? So I think those are pretty related, one being some detail and one being kind of some successes from shifting.
Yeah, maybe Scott, you can jump in with a Bluetooth.
Yeah, sure.
Question.
Absolutely. So the Bluetooth thermometer isn't a requirement of the tool. What we do find, however, is it really does help improve the quality and improve the accuracy of the temperature that you're tracking. Specifically, with the auto-stabilization features that are in the thermometer, so that you, let's say, probe, if you're cooking a rotisserie chicken, for instance, if you probe that chicken, it will auto-stabilize and you'll get the accurate temperature rather than, taking a temperature, recording a temperature before you reach the actual temperature. So I think that is probably one of the main benefits of the tool. But you certainly can't enter it with a manual. You can manually enter the temperature. But in our reporting systems, we always show whether the temperature was recorded manually or via Bluetooth. And we report on things like the percentage of completion with Bluetooth so that you can keep a track of those KPIs. As far as printing those off, you can access the data from the device itself. Also from the portal, you can see check by check what was completed. And we have some other ways that we can handle that as well via, for instance, push notifications or daily emails that would go out to the location to show what was completed in the previous day or perhaps what was missed or what was found out of compliance.
Right. And then maybe, Daryl, if you could jump in on some of these keys for success to move from paper to a digital system.
Yeah, I think Scott touched on it really well in the beginning. Is one of the key successes really evaluating your processes, right? If what we've seen is if you just take your paper logs and digitize them, right, you don't get the kind of change you want to see, right? So really looking at your process, what's important, what are my critical control points, what do I really need to know, put those in the tool, knowing that you're getting corrective actions and training and you're getting, immediate knowledge to whether these things are being done and completed and more accurate information. I think that's key. The other key is really, we found is getting the operations buy-in, and that's why I think it was, so great that Scott talked about some of the time savings and some of the other things. If, we were able to show in one place we launched that we, the cost of a program like this was really offset, in our time savings, our equipment savings, right, our improved data, those types of things. We were really able to show a good cost-benefit analysis to help the operators. And when you talk about, incorporating the whole thing, well, if you start to show seat time, we all know in training and operators are worried about, no matter what employee it is being off of the floor doing their job in a seat, when you can deliver training, corrective actions and everything, mobily, right as they're on the floor rather than taking them off the floor, back to being in a seat. So I think if you tie those things together, you really see the benefit to food safety, but you can also show the benefit to your operators, and I think that's key in implementing this, because we know those operations managers are ones that really control whether a lot of these things are successful in the facilities.
Yeah, and Daryl, if I could just add to that really quickly too, operations is important, and also the partnership with technology teams, right? Because we're oftentimes leveraging existing devices or device strategies that are deployed within customers, or helping deploy new device strategies. So it's certainly important using, the company's networks and those things that we're all combined working towards the same goal. So that's also important as well.
Yeah, great point, Scott.
Great. Well, we have come just about to the end of our time. Thank you, Ashley, for helping us with questions. If we could go to the next slide. I also want to thank Daryl, Scott, and Gerard for providing us really, really good information. This webinar is being recorded and you can access it later, but Ecolab has other resources available for you. The information on the right-hand side of the slide references our food safety resource library, which has lots and lots of articles and tips and readiness kits that can help you with particular risks. And these webinars, too. We've had a good year through 2020, and we will be continuing in 2021. So look forward to new topics coming up, and please think about these in planning out your educational opportunities for the new year as well. And with that, I thank you all for attending and really appreciate the content we could share, and wish you a pleasant day and happy holidays coming. Thanks very much.